Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for coming. Thank you to St. Edna's and Father Dario for welcoming us back to their home here. It's nice we feel at home here. I know that you met our committee in January, but I would like to introduce the committee again so you know who we are. Eileen today from Our Lady of the Wayside. Eileen, there she is. We have Angie Helmstetter from St. Edna, hometown girl. We have Sue Bale Leahy from St. Mary. Kathy Lane Ross from St. Raymond's. Didn't you clap for yourself? Ray McDermott was my son, he's a techie. And I'm Jean Brady McDermott from St. James. Welcome. We would like to thank our mentor and our friends, the two Kathys, our Kathy Squared, Kathy Kaspowitz and Kathy Paris, for being our friends, for mentoring. Thank you. And it is my honor tonight, and I truly mean this, to introduce our speaker, Dr. Karen Ross. Dr. Ross is the director of the Pathways at CTU program at Catholic Theological Union, which seeks to engage and empower young people, especially those from marginalized communities, in co-creating the Church of Tomorrow. Are we there? Look at us. Look what happened these past couple of days. Dr. Ross received her PhD in Theology and Ethics from Loyola University in Chicago, focusing on Catholic feminist theology and sexual ethics, and we are welcoming her tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I like to not be on a podium if that's okay, but if that's too distracting, please let me know. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you so much to Kathy Squared for the invitation. I met Kathy at St. Nick's, or John the 23rd, in Evanston, and I was so excited to get to meet you all here in Arlington Heights. So a little bit more about me that's more personal is I'm originally from Kalamazoo, Michigan, and then I went to college in Ohio, and then my PhD program in Chicago, and then I taught at Marquette in Milwaukee for 4 years after my PhD. So I'm a Midwest gal through and through, and I also have a not brand new anymore, but almost a year and a half year old toddler son. So I'm, learning how to both balance, teaching and being a director of the program, and also trying to be a good mom to the next generation of men. So, yeah, a little bit about me. Kind of my background is in feminist theology and sexual ethics in the Catholic Church. I was born and raised Catholic. And I am biracial Latina, so my mom is from Mexico City, my dad is from New England, and so I was always raised with a lot of accents in my house, the Boston accent and the Mexican accent, and I have a Midwest accent. So my husband's from Colombia, and so we have really kind of the Latino culture in our home. And I'm also, in my spare time when I'm not doing theology, I really like to, I'm a yoga and mindfulness teacher, and I also love to spend time exploring Chicago with my family and watching dramatic reality TV. So I don't know if there's any other people out there that, it's called mind decompression or something. There's a scientific word when you're talking about intellectual things all day. Sometimes you just need something simple. So we'll go to the next. So my PhD dissertation really focused on young women, and I wanted to know, what are we teaching Catholic young women and girls about their gender identities and sexualities in the Catholic Church? And how does that affect them today? So I really wanted to ask what young Catholic girls are learning in their sexual education and in their Catholic education in general, and how that affects their views of the faith, and as women, how does that affect them? So I'll be talking a little bit about what I found in my research today, but the next slide, thank you. For today, we'll be going through just some basics of systems of power at work in the church and society. Very simple. And then a brief overview of feminist theology. And by the time we're done, we will know how to transform the church. So very just small, easy task for Tuesday. And I did want to thank my colleague Peter. He didn't know that he was going to be the tech person for me, my assistant. But anyway, he's my colleague at Catholic Theological Union, so thank you for clicking. So a little bit about systems of power, and you might already know this, but I think it's just good to start with some of the basics of the water that we're swimming in our church, in our society, just to name it and say it for out loud what it is. So first, next slide, please. Marilyn Frye, this is very small, so I will send out the PowerPoint later. But Marilyn Frye, who's a sociologist in the 1980s, she talked about this web and how all of oppression is in this cage. And so she looked when she was focusing on certain issues and realized that they were all interrelated. And it was called the cage. And so she said, if you look very closely at just one wire in the cage, you cannot see the other wires. If your conception of what is before you is determined by this myopic focus, you could look at that one wire up and down the length of it and be unable to see why a bird would not just fly around the wire at any time it wanted to go somewhere. It is only when you step back, stop looking at the wires one by one, microscopically, and take a macroscopic view of the whole cage, that you see why the bird does not go anywhere, and then you will see it in a moment. So thinking about the web, the cage, if you just look at one wire, you might not know why somebody wouldn't just fly around the wire and be free. But when you step back and see all of the interwoven wires, you realize this is a system. So with sexism, this word is used a lot, but it is the discrimination based on sex and the attitudes, stereotypes, and cultural elements that promote this discrimination. So it's not just a single discrimination, it influences attitudes and cultural elements that really use their power to discriminate in a more systemic way, in a bigger way. And I don't need to tell you probably the church's legacy of sexism, but I do want to point out certain beliefs and systems that is part of the Christian tradition, of which I am a part as well. There's texts of terror in the Bible that feminist theologians have talked about, for especially biblical scholars. There are certain passages that talk about women being silent and being submissive to their husbands. There's a lot of interpretation of Bible passages that promote this sexism. Tertullian, who is an early church father, he said that Eve, woman, is the cause of human sin. And so it is through her temptation that all of humanity is now, a sinful species. Augustine, a famous Catholic theologian, church father, said that women aren't quite in the image and likeness of God without a man, without their husbands. They are in soul equal, but not in body. And Aquinas actually said that in his famous Summa Theologica, said that women were misbegotten males, that there was some kind of accident in fertilization that created women. So he really, had limited scientific knowledge at the time, but what's interesting is that these church fathers definitely perpetuated this legacy that affects us today, whether we see it or not. And so the big word that kind of talks about this system is patriarchy, and it comes from the Latin, from patris, which is father, and archi, which means rule. And so it literally means rule of the father. And this is a very controversial statement, but it is true that when you look at structures, especially the Catholic Church, you see that we are a system in which the social organization in which the power is centralized in the hands of dominant man or men. We literally call the leaders father, and the power and leadership is in the hands of the father. So the Catholic Church is a patriarchy just by definition. So when you think about, like, you know, any system in which the power is in the hands of dominant men or men, that is a patriarchy, just by definition. So, you know, it's hard to kind of wrap your mind around that we're participating in a patriarchy, but I would like to say that feminist theology offers a new vision of what our church could look like based on gospel of Jesus. So, androcentrism is another word where it's a pattern of thinking and acting that takes man to be the norm or standard of all of humanity. So saying things like, for us men and for our salvation, Jesus came down to save all mankind, us men. You know, we say it over and over again, but if it were changed to all of us women, Jesus came to save all of us women, maybe some people wouldn't like to say that if they didn't think that they were a woman. So that kind of male-centered language is everywhere in our hymnals, in our Christian tradition. So one of the feminist theologians that I look up to, who was one of the first in the US, Anne Clifford, she said all Christian feminist theologies share a distinguishing principle, and that is that patriarchy and androcentrism in their many forms conflict with faith in God, whom Christian revelation proclaims to be love itself. And so anything that is looking to subjugate or oppress someone else is against faith in God that proclaims to be loving and liberating for all. So I like to coin the term stained glass ceilings for all of these systems in which women and girls find themselves in religious spaces. So if you've heard of like breaking the glass ceiling at work, women breaking the glass ceiling, it's where a glass ceiling at work is when you think that you can advance in your career or in the workplace, but then you start hitting up, it looks like you can see through it and that you could reach it, but you hit a wall, a ceiling that, you know, is very firm. So I like to think of a religious type of limitations as stained glass ceiling that women and girls encounter when they try to take active leadership roles in religious institutions. So maybe you've had that experience or have seen that. So I wanted to bring to light some of the interviews that I did with young Catholic women for my dissertation, because I think that these voices are so powerful in their own experiences as women and girls in the church. So Joan, this is a pseudonym, age 23, said, "There are all these things you cannot do because you're a woman, and I had known that for a long time. You have no say in the church hierarchy. You hear all these places you are not allowed to be because of your gender." And then Stella, a 21-year-old woman, said, "I feel like women's voices aren't 100% heard. It really frustrates me because I think by not allowing women into leadership roles in the church, it omits their perspective completely. No matter how hard a man tries to be like, oh, maybe a woman might feel this way. They don't know. They've never lived in our shoes." And then Emily, a 19-year-old young woman I talked to, she said, "I knew that the Catholic Church thought there was something wrong with me, and that if I felt a calling to be a priest, the closest I could get would be a nun. Like if I felt that calling, an accident of fertilization is why I couldn't do it. And so she is kind of, I don't know if she was alluding to Aquinas's act of fertilization. Oh my gosh, there's all these Loyola friends that I just noticed. Hey. They were all in my PhD program, so this is exciting. Don't correct me, or you can correct me, but later. It was fun. So kind of hearing all of these voices of these young women and thinking about pretty heavy things like patriarchy and sexism in our church, what is it? Let's just take a moment to scan our own bodies and our own breathing to notice what it feels like when you experience, if you do, systems at work in the church, these systems. And how does this affect your faith? So just sitting with those feelings and reflecting for a moment about what it feels like when you experience these systems at work in the church. Would anyone like to share kind of their initial gut reaction talking about systems of power at work, especially against women? Yeah. I don't know. Okay.
I don't feel like it's in conflict with my, I don't feel that it is in conflict with my faith. My faith is inside of me. It is in I am in conflict with the institution. And that makes me feel very conflicted about how I should keep my faith.
Thank you. Yeah, so she was saying about her own faith and feeling that it's in conflict not with God but with an institution. And so that's a little confusing about feeding your faith. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, in the back.
It's just a feeling of ridiculousness. Like, why should I pay attention? Why is that a man on the pulpit or that man in the truck, whatever? It makes me feel very suspect. And is he going to say anything meaningful to me? And it's just very easy for me to shut down and walk away because I was hearing about Jezebel a couple weeks ago, and I thought to myself, she's not in charge. Why are we talking about her? Anyway, she was not. That's why we were talking about her. But in any event, I just have no, it just completely, like, this is really, I guess, maybe presumptuous of me, but I think to myself, I'm smarter than you. Why are you and your kind the only people running the show?
Yeah.
I'm angry.
Yeah, I would say that that's a righteous anger, and it's okay to be angry. I definitely understand. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, there's a big study in the 90s by CARA, which is a research group, I believe, from Women Religious, and the study just showed that women really were the management of churches in the U.S. They were just like the people that kept it running, basically. Yeah. Yes. Right. Yeah. I would love that as well to see. She just said there was, if I could paraphrase, the creative ideas that women bring to, she would love to see that within the church, with bringing 30 and 40-year-old women to kind of run the show, if you will, instead of perhaps the kind of same old business as usual. So, yeah. Yeah. Yes. Oh, Kathy, do you mind standing? Standing? Yeah. Is radically different, yeah. Yeah.
Disconnected. And so that is one of the major frustrations I have. It's in their own logic. That I don't, we just don't see it, or it's like, hello.
I was part of a Chicago discerning deacons circle, and one of the big things that they were talking about was that with women deacons in like the early first centuries of the church, that people were actually like, women deacons would go to the women in certain spaces where it wasn't appropriate, like, you know, medical spaces or things like that, or women's prisons, to kind of cater to specific needs where, you know, it would just not be the same with a man going there. So yeah, it's interesting about the kind of difference, separate but equal, but then we don't get like equal formation or pastoral care in that way. Oh, sorry, there was some on the left. I've been standing on the right. Yes. Oh, please stand. Sorry. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing. The theology teachers in the high schools and elementary schools are doing the real work, I feel like. Yeah. Yes.
I just want to add, I had a different high school experience. I went to a high school near the suburbs with basically women from the religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary who were not that much older. Yeah, were not that much older than we were, and that's who we identified with. That was church to us, and I'm very involved in social justice today, and that links right back to my high school experience. Very progressive people.
That's beautiful. Thank you. So I did want to keep going because we're going to talk a little bit about feminist theologies. I hope that you've heard of feminist theology before, but if you haven't, this is a real treat to introduce it to you. So Anne Clifford, who I referenced before, said that feminism is inherently to end oppression, discrimination, and violence directed to women and to acquire full equality and human dignity for every person, period. So, I mean, this feels very simple and basic, but very powerful, yet it's a very controversial word. Some people don't like the word feminist in talks and things like that, but it's really just to end discrimination, oppression, and violence for all people. So feminist theology in and of itself is just talk about God or study of God. And so anytime you're talking about God or studying God from the perspective of the marginalized, from the perspective of women and girls, and aiming equality and mutuality between the sexes, you're doing feminist theology. And I always I taught my first day of my Latina feminist theology class yesterday, and I said, you're all theologians. Don't let anybody tell you you're not, because you're studying about God and thinking about God. And so there are so many different kinds of feminist theologies. Womanist theology is Black feminist theology that emerged in the 1970s and 80s. Mujerista or Latinoa theology is Latina feminist theology. There's also post-colonial feminist theology, Asian feminist theology, and they're all from different cultural perspectives, but really centering, the experience of marginalized women and girls and calling for liberation in their theologies. And so Elizabeth Johnson, who is a Catholic sister and famous theologian, says that whenever violence is done to women, to their bodies or their spirits, it's insulting divine glory. So whenever there's violence towards women, even in a spiritual violence, it is an insult to God. So I think that's really powerful when you think about sin and, who is made in God's image, and we all are. And so what are we saying when we are perpetuating spiritual oppression or violence? And so in general, the way that the method of feminist theology is to be very critical and analyze what have we been told about our scriptures, about these church fathers, these church teachers that we always looked up to, critically analyzing where did they come from, what was their context. I bet a lot of the early church fathers had a very sexist outlook because of their context, and so really being critical about that and perhaps searching for alternative wisdom and suppressed history. So looking at who was the woman at the well, like what might have her story been like, and was this the way that the male writers wrote it? Is that the whole story? We can look for these, search for these suppressed wisdoms in our history. And we can also risk new interpretations of the tradition in conversation with women's lives. And so one of the beautiful things that I've gotten to do was I have, at Catholic Theological Union, I've gotten to preach for the first time, and I've never thought that that was something that I was able to do as a woman, but really looking at the gospel through my own life experience was just, it made me feel like I missed my calling, that maybe I should have been a preacher. Looking at Ash Wednesday in light of death and reproductive pain of women, looking at the adoption of Jesus, the story from the perspective of being a new mother. Like, there's so many things that I have now looked at theology in conversation with my own life because of feminist theology. So I have handouts. If you wanted to take yours out, it'll be easier for you to look at. So I just wanted to give some basic values that I thought were primary values of feminist theology. And I want you all to help me think about ways that these values can be implemented and transform our church. So I created this list. Feel free to add or subtract to it, but one of the main values of feminist theology is relationships and community. And so this is the idea that we are all dependent on one another and seek liberation through the context of community. So the idea that you don't succeed unless we all succeed. Like, we are not here to put each other down to try to make it to the top. We're here to get everybody in the boat and, you know, work our way to safety and to liberation together. So community, very big. Bodily wisdom. So instead of just prioritizing the mind or your intellect in your spirituality, the body and its emotions are valued as a source of wisdom. So things that you might feel are silly, like your gut or your emotional reaction to things, are actually sources of wisdom where the Holy Spirit is working in and through you, like a prophet. So, bodily wisdom. El cotidiano is a word from Latino feminist theology that means daily life. And yesterday in my class, I had a lot of Latina young women, and they said, I never knew that like washing dishes could be theology in daily life. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. Like, how did you think that theology was done? And they always said, like, oh, you have to like be in a seminary and have a very like a high degree. You have to be reading all these books. I never thought that women's daily chores could be doing theology or could be a spiritual practice. And so looking at the daily life, there's a sacredness to be found in small but significant interactions. So that's the idea of el cotidiano. Thanks for helping distribute. Liberation for all is the fourth one, and this is again the idea that feminist theology isn't just for women, it's for everyone. And so the idea that no one is free until we are all free, and it should not be a single issue struggle. So it shouldn't be just centered on one particular group of people. It should be a multi-issue struggle for freedom for everyone. Nonviolence and restorative justice. So the idea of our society having a cycle of violence and the retributive justice system that just punishes, locks away, throws the key, violence as punishment, is that rules our current society is not the path to true healing, says feminist theologians, many, and that actually restorative justice and the deep work of reconciliation is the more Christ-like path, but it's also a really difficult path to undertake. It's not easy. And finally, I put centering the marginalized. So thinking about the margins of our society and who is often left out in our church, in our city, in our country, and showing a preferential option, so showing a concern and a priority for the most vulnerable and excluded, and making decisions with those people at the center. So it's very radical. Instead of pushing people out, it's trying to bring the margins to the center. So trying to see who's not at the table. I took a community organizing class a few weeks ago, and they said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And we said that over and over again. And it's true, like if you don't have a seat at the table, you're likely gonna be subject to decisions made about you that you have no say in. So don't be on the menu, be at the table. So I did want to talk about those 6 on the handout. So if you wanted to turn to some of your friends around you and maybe talk about 1 or 2 of those values that you see in your life or that you wish to see in your life that stuck out to you, some of these values that you might want to bring forward to the church. So we'll take about 5 minutes just to talk amongst yourselves. All right, we can draw back to the center if that's okay. I like. I love. Yeah, we should. So I'm curious if anybody wants to talk a little bit about what you found interesting in the values, or ways that you see that or do not see that play out. Any thoughts about the commitments and how they might be different than current commitments you see? Or I'm just interested. Yes.
Something that's not even on there, but I think is in there, is how we talk about God, how we name God. And it's really important to me that God is not just named a man. Because when we do that, we teach our daughters, God's a man, and we teach our sons. I mean, if you can't see it you say to yourself, I don't care, it doesn't, but we are subconsciously teaching our daughters and sons who God is, and God's a man. So one of the things that I do, if it's scripture and it just says Abraham, and I add their wives' names. If it says father, I say God. I don't need to hear mother. I don't need mother and father. But we have to we don't have to do anything, but I do have to use inclusive language for God. Always.
Thank you. That's amazing. I once I started having little God books with my son. There's Mother God books that they've come out with over the years that are really beautiful, and they're based in scripture and mother imagery. That's really beautiful. For kids' books. Yes.
Something that I have not heard today or this evening was up until just a few seconds ago, we were speaking about language. What is the language that we use in everything regarding church? We use a male language, which is totally wrong. If you go to the scriptures, when Jesus taught his disciples how to pray, he spoke in Aramaic, and what he said, the very first word he said is abun, which translates to O birther, birther of life, birther of creation. We need to change the language in our minds, in our perception, that God is genderless, that God is creator. I'm losing my train of thought here, but I think you might understand it if you look at, get an Aramaic translation of the Lord's Prayer. It'll blow your mind, because it's totally different than what has been translated from Greek to Latin to English to thousands of other languages. It's incomprehensible how it has been adulterated to a totally male concept.
Thank you. I just learned that from you, so thank you so much. That was beautiful. I'm like very enlightened. That's amazing.
Can I just say, I loved what you just said over there. I have 5 sons and a daughter. They thought they were ruling everything. She turned out to be a captain in the Air Force. They saluted her. It was good. But I wanted to tell you, too, I went to a conference years and years ago with Father Bill Savasky from St. James. They had a display. People were selling things, and he said, "Hey, Jeannie." I said, "Yeah." I think we were supposed to be someplace else, so I was like, "Yeah." But he said, "I found a shirt for you." I said, "You did? Okay." Big letters. God is not a boy's name. my family was like, you can wear that in here, but don't wear that outside because somebody's going to beat you up. I thought, God is not a boy's name. I still have it. I should have worn it tonight. Yeah, it's serious. Read this thing.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments? Yes.
I found a wonderful book that's called Psalms for Praying. It's by Nan Merrill. And the word God is not used, nor is any male word used. It's words like eternal listener, soul mender, beloved, compassionate one. And when you pray the Psalms and you pray with those kind of words, your relationship with the holy deepens and deepens and deepens, and then you begin to relate to the Holy One as more of a human person, as some person that you can identify with, because you identify with compassion, with listening, with being the beloved. And it's very beautiful. I would also like to say that as part of my Lenten journey, my husband and I did the Catholic women's strike. And what we decided was that we would go to liturgies that were only female-led. And in a community in California called Namaste, an elderly gentleman whose name was Tom Blank said, you know, I give a lot of thought to this idea. I wonder what will happen to the bishops and the priests when they get to heaven. And Jesus says, when I was naked, and they answer, you clothed me, I clothed you. When I was hungry, you fed me. What will they say when Jesus asks, when I was a woman?
Thank you so much. Well, let's try to hear from maybe one or two more people. Any other thoughts about feminist theological values? Thank you.
I want to go back to what the gentleman back there about stand up. If the legs will work. It's interesting that we should be talking about God in neutral terms, and I agree with what Spirit Grace just said. I happen to have the same book, and it does change your whole perspective when you're praying. But you know, I can go back in my own journey. I mean, I'm 76 years old, and I can remember, I mean, I don't even know how many years ago, it was a long time ago, but women were writing prayer. They were writing liturgy services, myself included, not being allowed to have them done at church. But, and it makes me wonder, what has happened? What has happened? Because I don't feel like there's really anywhere to share that. I feel homeless, and I know I'm blessed with gifts, especially the gift of prayer, writing prayer. But, you know, that was stuff that we did years ago, right? I'm not alone in that. And where are we? Where is that? I don't hear much about that anymore. And I'm going to say it again. I feel homeless as a result.
Thank you for sharing. I work with mainly Gen Z right now, and I think one of the big, virtues of that generation is that they can spot when you're being inauthentic or when you're like bullshitting them, and they're just like, nope, I'm leaving. I'm not going to be a part of this. And so I think, what's beautiful is that they see when people are authentic and are drawn to that, but they also can see when you are, just telling them a tale, or, they're very sensitive to justice issues. And so I think a lot of young people just don't feel welcome in the church, and so don't even try. And so it's beautiful to hear about like stories where you felt like, you know, people were writing prayers and people were leading and people were listening to women. And so I would love to have that again. But I think a lot of younger generations are really disillusioned by the current state. Yeah, I know, definitely. I think a lot of people are disillusioned, but let's just kind of move to the last section very quickly. But I don't really have the answers about how to transform the church, but I have a lot of people that I read and look up to that have really amazing wisdom about how to, you know, proceed. One of those things is creative visioning. We have to think about all of these different values that I just grabbed from different texts, but also adding our own and bring those values as a priority, not only in your faith community, but in your family, in your workplace. How do you foster community? How do you foster sacredness in the everyday life? How do you value the voices of people on the margins? There's all these different kind of countercultural values that we could bring into our daily interactions, and understanding our own voices as we are prophets, we're priests by virtue of our baptism, we are queens, kings, or royalty. And so how do we view ourselves as like standing in the image of God amidst the cultural forces that tell us that we're not? And so one of the kind of phrases that a lot of feminist theologians use is the kingdom of God. So instead of the kingdom of God being this, you know, reigning land of a king, the kingdom is where we all are, you know, brethren, we are brothers and sisters, and we are kin to one another. And what does this look like to you, and what does it feel like? Being very creative in what the church would look like if it was truly liberated, free, inclusive, equitable. What does that feel like, especially as women in the church? And what are ways that you can work to bring that about in these small but mighty acts of resistance? One of your acts of resistance is having this group, and it's pretty amazing. I am like very inspired by just seeing you all and seeing you raise your voices, and I'm learning just as much as you are all learning. So that's all I have for today, but does anyone have any questions for me? My area is in theology and ethics, so I'm going to defer to some of the Bible people here for the biblical questions, but feel free to ask anything of me that I could help with. Yes? Right.
So I want to be able more to have every result of that. But I was reminded way back in the 80s, I heard from a female theologian, Rosemary.
I love her.
Somebody said to her, "Why do you stay? Why do you stay Catholic?" And her response was, "If I don't stay, I can't be part of the change." And I think that carries me through to keep doing what I do. At the food pantry, most of us are women handing out food, and we have great guys who are really good as well. But we're seen on that same plane. And my son and I, he picked it up, but when we do the creed, I say, for us and our salvation, I don't say us in heaven. That's my way, and changing life helps. But if we don't work together, we cannot be part of the change.
I love that. Amen. Thank you. Anything else? I know it's been, I think, about an hour, so any other last questions or thoughts? Yeah, Kathy. No. Oh. Right.
paradigm that everything else is built on. And so maybe
Yeah. I know. I feel like there needs to be a whole, like, you know, reworking of what is tradition, you know, and in light of what is life-giving and what is not. Because wasn't it that Aquinas thought that, like, the, you know, uterus was just an upside down male part? So, like, and that's not his fault, like that was the science of the time, but how are we integrating what we know now about the universe and the interconnectedness of all things with our theologies now? Yeah, totally. Thank you. Yes.
I kind of think that it's still the trickle-down theory. And as you were speaking, I was trying to remember what you were talking about. And I think when we had Cardinal Bernardine, he was a more progressive person, and we had a little bit more women on the altar. And then when the Cardinal changed, things changed. Cardinal George, as I recall, was a little bit more straight-laced and liked things the way they used to be. So therein, the trickle-down, we ended up with that. And right now, I'm not sure where we are because I think there are some who like Vatican II theology, which is more inclusive and circular, and there are some who are still back in the 50s with the hierarchy and wanting to be in charge and the pyramid instead of the circle. So I think our role, maybe if we're looking for answers, is to speak up. Let them know how we feel. Let them understand us better if we can, because that's important to us. And we, as their flock, we should count. We should matter. So that's what I would recommend. Oh, one more question. If you would, Karen, we are looking at our Papa here, and I'm just wondering if you would care to comment on his role.
I mean, I think that Pope Francis, especially with synodality, Peter was just reminding me because I took a group of young adults to Rome in October for the synod, and we were synod adjacent. We weren't like in the hall for the conversations, unfortunately, but Pope Francis has appointed women or had appointed women in the synod conversations and as voting participants and as leaders in the Vatican, unlike ever before. So I think that was really beautiful, and the way in which he centered the most vulnerable and the most marginalized was something that I had a giant impact on my life. I think it had a giant impact on especially people who maybe felt homeless from the church. I think Pope Francis really made space for us and enlarged the tent. So I hope, I was really, really sad yesterday, but I hope that, that we can believe that the Holy Spirit is always working. And we'll see what happens next. Yeah.
Kathy had just said we need to speak up. Well, there are some of us here that were at Sacred Heart of Mary High School with the Religious of the Sacred Heart, and it was the late 60s. It was post-Vatican II, just by a few years. It was the women's movement. It was civil rights. It was the Vietnam War, and people were speaking up about all of those things. And so I guess I grew up as a teenager thinking we can make a difference. And I think you're right, we have to stay, but we have to speak up. And one thing I'd like to, if you're at CTU, I'd like every priest in training to have every Sunday while they're a seminarian, sit in the pew with a toddler or a teenager. And you can learn everything you need to know about a homily and what it should be. And then the other thing, when we say, what is the role of women in the church? Well, look in your own parishes. Sometimes I look up and I want to say, Father, you are the only man up there. The lector, the cantor, all of, Eucharistic ministers, all these women go up, and maybe this is too radical, but we can go on strike. How do we figure that out? And then we know the role of women in the church.
Thank you so much for having me. I'll leave it at that because that was beautiful. Thanks.